you don't have to be, real smart in order to figure this out. You just have to figure out who has done it and then pay real close attention. And if you can copy, modeling success, Jay Abraham calls it. But you can do this. Anybody can, right? You just got to learn the skills and do the right steps in the right order, and anybody can achieve any level of success.
Designed to encourage, empower, and educate real estate professionals by sharing best practices from business leaders that are proven winners. I'm your host, Kyle Malnati, and this is Calibrate Real Estate. Broadcasting from the Mile High City, thank you for tuning in to the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Malnati, and this episode is always tailored for you, the real estate professional around the world. We're designed to encourage, empower, and educate you. And today's guest is going to be an amazing conversation with a gentleman named Jay Kinder. Jay's from Dallas, Fort Worth, by way originally of Oklahoma. He and his wife, Amber, live in Dallas, Fort Worth, and he operates a coaching company, a consulting company for real estate professionals called the National Association of Expert Advisors, NAEA for short, and he co-founded that with a gentleman named Michael Reese. Jay, say hello.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's my pleasure to be here, Kyle.
Well, you're welcome. And I came familiar with you from Carlos German, who was one of our past guests. Right. Carlos sent me the Miracle Morning for Real Estate Agents book, which you co-authored with Michael, your co-founder of your company, as well as another Michael and Hal Elrod, the original author of that book. So I've got to know, I'm an aspiring author. I enjoy writing. I enjoy communicating. What's it like to collaborate on a book? I've got to imagine that's got to be a lot of fun, but also a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of fun. It is a lot of work. It's a tremendous amount of work because you really want to get it right and you want to be able to communicate it in the right way. And anytime you get, to work with someone like Hal Elrod, and that book changed, his original book changed our lives. And Michael Mayer did a really great job of helping tell the story in that book. And it was an every, once a week, getting together, do the homework, reviewing. It took us, pretty close to a year to, I think, finish the book. But it was definitely a fun project and one that I, love to do again with people like that.
I've got to imagine, and I know that this happened for Hal, because I read The Miracle Morning, and it was impactful for me. Read it really quickly on a vacation that I had, a tropical vacation, and it was a wonderful experience. One of the things I like about Hal is in the intro of all of his books, he says, I want you to mark it up. I want you to underline. I want you to write in the margin. I want you to use this. That's one of the best compliments you can give to an author. So I imagine that probably has opened some amazing doors for you and has been this amplifier to your existing consulting business. So sure. What type of cool opportunities have happened having known Hal, obviously, and Michael Maher, and just what are some of the things that you and Michael Reese have been able to do because of that platform?
Sure. Yeah. I think, the main thing it does is it creates an awareness and it gives you a little bit of influence, if, and it's, more than anything, I think it's, you get to make an impact in people's lives. So it's not so much the opportunities or doors that it's open. I think, we've had several people that, have come to us because they read the book or they resonated with the book in one way or another. But, it's really I think the reason that we want to get a book out there a lot of times is because we want to be able to, the stories that were, that's changed my life. I read your book, that's changed my life. That's really why we do it. And so, while it's created great, opportunities and people and a lot of awareness of people that maybe had never run across us before, the most fulfilling part of it is definitely, when somebody comes up and stops you and says, I read your book and it really helped me. It changed my life. Like that's what it's all about for us.
So let's talk about NAEA. That's a consulting business that you and Michael Reese co-founded. And I imagine it's got to be very empowering for you to consult with real estate agents when you yourself were a top producing agent, one of the top producing agents in the world when you were with Coldwell Banker. So what's it like to go to cross that bridge from producer and high producer at that? You told me as we were prepping for the home, over 500 homes sold in 1 year, which is incredible, and operating a big team, over a dozen people on that team. So what's it like to kind of cross that bridge, and does it ever feel weird, and kind of what are those experiences now that you're in the consulting side of it?
The only thing that comes to mind is like, man, I got a long list of lessons learned that I could probably go through right here. Anytime you're focusing on, your passion and making a difference in people's lives. And, you've been on enough listing appointments, at that point, I don't even know the number, but it was a lot by this time. It just wasn't as fulfilling to sell another home. And while I enjoyed helping the people on my team grow and become the best version of themselves, and really help them, accomplish their goals, there was a bigger platform that, that we felt like we could do it on. And it certainly didn't start as like, hey, you know what, we should create this association. We'll call it the National Association of Expert Advisors. It's not at all like that. Like we got into, the first thing we did was selling websites, and we had websites that we were using that were working really well. They were using us as kind of endorsers for those websites. Then that, morphed into that company actually went out of business. The long story is hysterical. It's not hysterical to us because it was painful as I can ever imagine anything being. You wake up one day and your new business, 90% of the revenue just stops coming through the door. That's what happened with the website company that we were representing. And we actually had negotiated half of that company and we're representing all sales, and it was going gangbusters, but they got sued and shut down. And, from some previous things that they had done that we didn't really know about. And so that was a real big lesson learned. You wake up one day and your new venture is basically, now a huge liability. So that, that was, kind of the first, running into the brick wall and learning some things. But, we were Kinder Reese coaching after that because we had to do something, dramatically different. And we were fortunate because we had the way we were selling websites was we were just giving them coaching on the side, doing calls and adding value to the agents that had those websites. And we, because we were relevant, we're actually out there selling real estate at the time. The things that we were teaching people were, super actionable and proven to work and things like that. So that enabled us to, to really, survive that. And of course, this is like during the downturn, so that makes it extra fun. More lessons learned. But we pushed through, and ultimately we became the National Association of Expert Advisors because our best clients, we had a lot of very successful clients. And what we learned was the biggest challenge most of them had was implementation. So we needed a platform that we could kind of create things around so that we could actually certify and then just give you the done for you kind of stuff that, from presentations and marketing pieces and things like that, you can, we could leverage that platform. So that's how it ended up, NAEA. We didn't just wake up and say, we're going to change and we're going to all be expert advisors. And that's the goal, right? Like that's the vision. No, it changed a million times along the way. And, as we learned and grew to that, and that's the platform we have today.
It's so interesting. I'm a broker owner of a startup that has been in business for 2 years, and I've been in the real estate industry since 2004. So, over a decade and counting. And it's interesting. It always turns out a little bit different than what you expected. And at the same time, not super far off of what you expected, because obviously you've got a vision, you've got a purpose for doing what you do, and impacting people, I think is really the theme of what you were talking about. And I think it's just so interesting because I think people expect you to have it all figured out when you're starting something.
Right.
And the definition of that is, no, I mean, we're going to get this figured out as we go. And you're sort of building this airplane as it's taking off. It's kind of crazy,
No doubt.
So,
right.
I've got to just think back to when you were a producing real estate agent. What are some things that you did to grow to the point where you could produce the sale of over 500 homes in a year, be nationally recognized, globally recognized with the Coldwell Banker organization? And what are some things that you did to make yourself obviously relevant to mega producers now? And you talk about doing conferences and speaking engagements and things of that sort. So what are some of the things that you really had to do in your systems as you were working as an agent now that you teach others?
Right. Yeah. So, we were very much focused in my business. I was fortunate. I grew really quick. So, I say I was fortunate. The lesson learned there, I went from 233 to 360 to 4 something to 5 something a year and stayed at that level for a while. And the things that you learn along the way is that you better put systems in place or it's going to end up back on your plate. And you better hire great people or it's going to end up back on your plate. And so those are two things that we got really good at, and really good at understanding the type of talent you needed and who you're looking for. Hire slow, fire fast in terms of the key people that you want to have around you. And there's more and more lessons I learned after that as we grow. NAEA is a much bigger company than my real estate company was. And, around core values and understanding the importance of your culture and things of that nature. But as you get, further along in production, like what really was the catalyst to my growth, if you will, if I was to say I was going to point to one or two things, those are necessary because you were able to acquire more customers. Right. And the way we were able to acquire more customers was, I was very involved in, and this is a side note, I would say. It wasn't a direct action. Like if you're involved in your community, you're going to grow your business. That's not the case. But I was very involved in my community, and I was, involved in the Chamber of Commerce, and I was very visual in the community, and very involved in trying to make the place I live a better place. But that's what allowed some of the marketing and things to work. And we did some radio and some larger scale stuff. We reinvested back in the business. And, most of the agents that I've ever coached that get up to 200, 300, 500 plus transactions all had a similar path. They were all willing to call FSBOs and expires at some point in their life, because if you haven't, that's the fastest way for you to learn every objection you're probably ever going to get and every cuss word that there is in the human language. So, those are all things that I experienced, and everyone I've ever seen that really made it, did it. And I think the reason for that is, it's the catalyst, right? I mean, you can easily do 2 or 3 deals a month, and it, that might be 20, 30,000, depending on what markets you're in, per month. You can make $250,000 selling just FSBOs and expires and do nothing else, buy nothing else. And so everyone I've ever seen do that, you have money to parlay into marketing. And if you get around smart people, and before the podcast, I was thinking about this because we did a podcast this morning and I was talking about it. And when I talked about it this week, it just came up like 3 times in a row in my mind. Is like, it's about modeling success, right? Like there's a lot of really successful people out there that, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to understand, like, what are the right steps in the right order? How did they get where they went? And, these are those steps, right? This is a, surface level kind of overview, but, okay, so I got listings. They didn't cost me any money. And then, I learned my skills. That's where I learned my skills and polished my skills. And I parlayed that into a larger media where I became known as the go-to person in the marketplace. And then from there, I spent more money in billboards, radio, did television, did all of those things. So, I became kind of when somebody thinks real estate in my marketplace, I was either the number 1 or number 2 name that came up. It didn't matter if you went into a gas station, into a grocery store, into a business, and I became recognized as one of the top people in the marketplace. And I think that was, the real catalyst. And you can do that in a small neighborhood or an entire marketplace, but, you typically want to start. I say be the Incredible Hulk in a puddle and jump up and down instead of trying to be like, I'm going to take over the whole market, is the right approach to that. But that was, to me looking back, that was the catalyst to, the success that we had ultimately over the years.
I love that. Be the Incredible Hulk in a puddle. It's we're going to trademark that, and that's going to be yours. Original content.
I'm guessing it belongs to somebody else. I'm pretty sure I didn't make it up. Like anything else, I had a guy one time break down my like my life story to get down to like, what's the one phrase that would be your phrase. And after we went through it like for a day, he came up with seek the best to be the best. And I tell people I wasn't the smartest kid in class. I just always sat next to him. And, the other thing I tell people is that I graduated in the top 25 of my class, but there was only 36 of us. So like, you don't have to be, real smart in order to figure this out. You just have to figure out who has done it and then pay real close attention. And if you can copy, modeling success, Jay Abraham calls it, he gets mad when I say copy. So I always try to correct myself. But you can do this. Anybody can, right? You just got to learn the skills and you do the right steps in the right order, and anybody can achieve any level of success.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an author named Austin Kleon that wrote a book called Steal Like an Artist. And one of the concepts in that book is very simply that if you look at the artist's throughout history, they were all influenced by someone, and usually a couple of different people, and their art tends to be a function of the modeling that they had throughout their, so it's actually the sincerest form of flattery, obviously, and you want to do it in the right way, of course, but you know, the big fish in the small pond is the same thing as you say with the Incredible Hulk jumping in a puddle. And so you talked about being that market expert, especially in a small community, and that community ambassador, which we talk a lot about on our podcast. You had mentioned to me as we were getting to know each other, your radio spot. And I'd love to hear you talk about that. And then also you just mentioned your podcast, the Face-to-Face podcast with Michael Reese. And I'd love to hear kind of some of the conversations that you have there so that some of our listeners and subscribers can get to know you more on that. But let's talk about radio first and how that impacted your business.
Yeah. So radio was, it was an interesting, I would say it was, a test, in the beginning. I didn't know if it was going to work or not, but I tended to try, just about anything. If somebody has made it work and I think I can make it work, I'll try it. And this guy that was doing radio at the time, he actually owns Radio and Television Experts. We opened that company together, and does Barbara Corcoran endorsements across the country. Glenn Beck, Sean Hannity, anybody you've seen in your marketplace that's got a celebrity endorsement has probably come from this company. And so we had, he's grown that, considerably since then, but it was the same principles, right? When you take the local morning show, we had a really good morning show. And instead of being like run of schedule, which is what a lot of times you'll find when you're doing radio, they'll just sell you anything run of schedule. There's a reach and there's a frequency. And the reach is how many ever listeners might listen to the radio ever in a month. But the frequency is how many times they're going to hear the message. And, there's a couple things that really made a huge difference in that, in radio for us. Number one, there's only 15,000 people that listen, but at 750, it was the same 15,000. So like at any point you might listen to the station, it may not ever be the same people that are listening, but at 750, it's usually the same people because they're in that morning routine and people are creatures of habit. And so I became a part of that morning show. So that was a first in rotation spot. These are all little nuggets, I guess, if you will, but like a first in rotation spot was right out of the live read. We went to us, and it was an interview style commercial. Again, they will never sell you this, by the way. It's not usually one of the packages they try to sell you because it's like prime placement and real strategic around getting, the morning show host to do, live reads with you, and it's a little bit harder for them to they couldn't offer it to everybody. So, but if you go in asking for it, you can get it. It'll be a little bit more expensive, but it's totally worth it. So we wrote the introduction. So introducing me, they were introducing me as one of the top real estate agents in the world. And if I left that up to chance, I don't know how they would introduce me. But if you write it, the front and the ending, you can control those things. And so that, and then we just told stories, and we drove them back to to our website for more information about different programs and things that we were offering. Typically talked mostly to sellers, and maybe probably 80% we talked to sellers and maybe 20% to buyers. And so those were, that was kind of the strategy. And again, one spot a day, it ran at 750, 5 days a week. And that was, it ultimately, I'll never forget the first appointment I went on that came from radio. And the guy, I didn't know this guy, never met him before. He was I ended up knowing him afterwards, obviously, but he was the golf pro at Fort Sill, which is the military base that's there. It's the number one employer there. And, the golf, he's the golf pro. And he's literally turning red, and he's like grinning from ear to ear when I'm giving him this presentation. We'd already walked through the house and everything, but I was just talking to him, giving him my presentation or whatever at the time. And he's like, I got to stop you. You sound just like you do on the radio. And like, he was literally like, almost like, it felt like he was almost starstruck that I was sitting in his living room. And I was like, at that moment, I realized how powerful radio was and how powerful the media is, that when you can get someone's attention and kind of become a part of their day or a part of the ritual, that, they're going to call you, they're going to refer you, and they don't even necessarily know you. And so that was a big get for me at that time, because everything else I'd done was marginally successful, but I think the attitude that radio gave was, hey, this guy's got a personality. They can hear they can't see me, but they, this auditory, it's not just a direct mail piece, which I'd done a lot of. It wasn't just a billboard where I was, there's no tonality and there's no story that can be told and that kind of stuff. So very much an eye opener as far as how big of an opportunity there was, utilizing radio.
Well, I think it's really interesting, and this is over a decade ago as you're doing all this, that you do become a star. You become a celebrity. I've got a good buddy in Dallas, Fort Worth named Rogers Healy, and Rogers has been on our podcast, and he's become a good friend. He's a 30 under 30, just like both you and I are.
Good dude. We know Roger.
Yeah, he's a very good dude, and he says that the best real estate agents become a celebrity in their local market, and then they make their clients feel like royalty. And so that person is literally starstruck because that's part of his day. And whether it's 5,000 or 15 or 50,000 people listening, that's a pretty cool experience. And I think it's very counterintuitive to most of the models in real estate, which are repeat and referral business, which is great for sure. And sphere of influence. You're doing this very tactically. There's a system behind it, and it's a scalable system. So I think that's really, really cool. Now let's talk about your podcast. You were talking about this at the beginning when we first got to know each other. The podcast medium has really evolved, and you were saying, man, I wish I would have had that at that time as an agent. And let's talk about podcasting a little bit and what you guys do over on your podcast, Face to Face.
Yeah. So we started the podcast, and I guess probably not even really recognizing how big the opportunity was with podcasting. And, it's called Face to Face with Jay Kinder and Michael Reese. And it's a little bit entertaining. I think some of it about half entertainment, but, and we're just super open and real about just about everything we talk about. But, it was focused around, we're always asking the question, man, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way. And so, I think what our focus has always been is that, when you're face to face with a client, it's the highest dollar per hour work that you do. And there's so many shiny objects and things that are going on in the industry. And I mean, it really is. There's so many opportunities. There's so many ways that you can do it. A guy showed me today at lunch, literally today at lunch. He showed me, and I can't even remember the name of this program, but it was a company that will actually buy the house and do almost like the rent. They can, anybody who's looking to rent but can't quite buy can literally buy this house, get paid a commission. You get paid a commission because they actually purchase the property and do a rent back until they don't have to buy it, but they have the opportunity to buy the right to buy the house, but they're they don't have to buy the house. And it was an interesting program, but I'm like, there's so many things that you can do. Like that was working for this guy, and that's great. You know what I'm saying? But like, is that the goal or is that not the goal? Is the goal to work with, people that maybe can, maybe can't buy? And is that the right place to spend a few $1,000s, or should it be somewhere else? Like that's where it starts to get challenges. There's so many little shiny objects that you can focus on, like taking the time to get really clear on what the goal is a huge deal. Because, you can find yourself with 12 inside sales agents making calls and circle prospecting and, really pushing the rock up the hill, if you will. Or you could invest that into marketing that positions you as the go-to expert in the marketplace, and the phones ring off the hook with people that can't wait to do business with you and pay you your fee, no matter what that fee is, because they want to, they feel connected to you as the go-to, person in the marketplace. So that's, kind of been my experience with them, but that's what we talk about on the podcast, all the things that we're doing, all the things that work, don't work. And we had a brokerage, we moved over to EXP. So that's pretty much what it is.
So you'd mentioned this just a moment ago, moving a brokerage and kind of winding down your brokerage business, which I would think from my perspective, having been in real estate brokerage for over a decade, that's got to be really hard to kind of say goodbye to your baby. And at the same time, there's probably certain days where you're like, thank goodness I'm no longer in real estate brokerage. So what was that like? Was it easy? Were there challenges? I'm sure there were. And then also now doing a different company where you're in the business, but not necessarily a producer. And so you've got that street cred. You've been there, done that, but you're no longer in that. You're not meeting at people's houses and doing listing presentations.
Right. Yeah, there was a couple things that came from that. There's a lot of things that came from this, but the first thing was when I stepped out of the business, and I knew a lot of agents that were claiming that they were moving to the 7th level, but I never met anyone actually step out of the business, right? Like you were still there, you were still going on appointments from time to time, or at least in leadership. and I moved to Dallas, Texas. So like it was, and I didn't move right away. So like I was going back and forth, and as soon as I call it getting hit with a 2x4, which is when you don't realize that something is about to go bad, and you get hit with this 2x4 and you're like, where did that come from? And I had several of these moments in my trying to step out of my real estate brokerage. And it's all about, leaders creating leaders. And, I had created some great leadership, but I hadn't connected them to the vision. So when I was gone to Dallas, Texas for a week at a time or whatever, they didn't realize that that was their opportunity as well, and how important the main business was. And so from a leadership standpoint, I lost, like my top 3 agents and my right-hand guy that had been with me forever, all in one whack. They went and opened their own company on their own. And it took me a year to really like get past the hurt, the hurt of that and the sting of it. But what I ultimately came to the conclusion of was it was a leadership problem from the top. And, it was up to me to communicate the vision in a way that they saw this as their biggest opportunity. And I hadn't aligned, their goals in selling real estate or running that company even, and how that aligned to what I was focused on, and made it clear that I cared about their goals and made sure that there was that I understood their goals and that this was the place for them to be to achieve those goals. And so, you lose some people like that, and, it's a real eye opener, and, immediately back in the business. Right. So back in the business on listing appointments, every day. It's like I said before, getting let out of prison and on the weekend and having to go back on Monday. You get a little bit of freedom and you think the business is going to run without you. And then you realize, oh no, you're not. You get your right back in there. You're going back to work, buddy. And it takes a while to fix it. Right. Cause you got to get listings and they got to go under contract and they got to sell. So like that, the loss of that revenue on the listing side, and my average sale price was really low. So I didn't have any room to be making mistakes in compensation, and I couldn't overspend in areas because my average sale price was so low. A lot of people I knew that were stepping out of the business had average sale price of $400,000. Mine was $135,000. So, I really had to have the model dialed in. And the first thing you recognize, like the week that you're not in the business, for me was the metrics that I needed to know that everything was okay. And I knew a lot of those metrics, we had different reporting, but nothing talked to each other. There's a lot more technology than there was back then, but nothing none of that stuff was really aggregated in a place that I could be like, yep, everything's good over here. Nothing on fire over here. And you can kind of feel that in your business. Like, things are going well or they're not going well. You're a little behind pace. And it's going to be it's going to be a really great month. And you can feel it when you're in the office. When you're gone, you have nothing but whatever you can get, to look at, to try to basically fly the plane from another city. So it became real clear that there was things missing about business that no one was teaching in real estate. And so, we started going outside of the real estate industry to learn those things so that we could run the business like a business. And that was the turning point. Just when I thought I'd learned enough to go teach other people, I learned I didn't know near enough to teach people. And we had to learn a lot of those skills. And it took me 3 times I stepped out, got thrown back in the fire before I finally stepped out, and we started to have successful, high profit margins consistently. Very painful.
Well, and it's very humbling, like you said, painful and humbling, and especially the story. And I could just see how that happens, as a startup for me. Fortunately, that hasn't happened yet, but over my career working at other companies, I've had other people spin off the team. And that was the right thing for them. They were wanting to do something different within the industry, and they had learned what they needed to learn, and they had moved on. And so for those folks, and I've been that person too, I started working on a team and moved up, and the best exit I ever had was the exit where I left my mentor. And they were very candid in that they said, look, we did this too, and we understand it, and we wouldn't be good mentors, we wouldn't be good leaders if we didn't understand and appreciate that this is what you need to accomplish, that this next step, this, flying the nest type of thing, cutting the cord, whatever you want to call it. So that's difficult and there's learning in it. And I think that's the thing about stumbling, failing, having something not going the way that you expect. There's always a lesson in there, and that lesson, it stings, but it is very prominent. And so for you, what are some of the steps you made? You said you went out and looked at other businesses. You obviously started looking at dashboards within your business of how the metrics worked, but what were some key metrics that you really honed in on that you're like, these are the things I've got to figure out because I need to feel the business even though I'm not there? And then also, what are some things that you did? I like that idea of getting outside the real estate industry to learn about operating a business.
Yeah. So Jay Abraham was our first mentor outside of real estate. We paid anybody that sold anything within the real estate industry at some point or another. We bought it all. And I think that's just the nature of, a lifelong learner. I still do it to this day, and I'll continue to do it because it's been probably the best thing that I've ever been is, being willing to learn and knowing that I don't know it all and find somebody who does. But I think from at this point, there was two key things that were not clear. And that was, what exactly did we need to do strategic planning from a strategic planning standpoint, evaluating everything that's going on, and how are we making decisions in the business on where our focus is going to go. And then what were the financials, and how do we need to look at that in order to know and make those good decisions? And thankfully, we read a book called Mastering the Rockefeller Habits by Vern Harnish. He has since remade that book to Scaling Up. And we religiously, we would play the audio book in our strategic planning meetings and like, okay, what do you say right here? All right, this, that we'll play it back. I didn't catch that, and like, what's he trying to say here? He gives them McDonald's analogy or something. And you're like trying to relate it back to real estate, but it was cool because I got to do that with multiple companies now. Right. So I got to look at it from different angles and see how it related and what was missing in my thinking about real estate that that other industries were doing and things like that. So that was a great book. At the same time, Vern Harnish had recommended a book to us called Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits. And that's by a gentleman named Greg Crabtree. And I'm not much on reading accounting books. It's not where my strength is. But when your number one guy leaves you that does all of your accounting and everything, and I manage everything by the cash flow, which is another thing I don't recommend doing at the time. But that's how we were running the business at the time. So these are all those lessons learned. None of that stuff I do today, but it was a critical moment because I read that book, and you talk about coloring it up. I read it twice in a weekend, and it didn't have any picture. It had a few pictures, but not near enough pictures. And it helped me to understand why I was struggling at this stage of the business. And it just made things clear. There's a couple of key things that we learned to look at. One was, the return on labor dollar. And return on labor dollar, it doesn't move up or down real quickly, but you can kind of get a gauge for how things are going in terms of the people that you're hiring and as you're growing a company, how things are, how you're getting a return on that. The other thing was, looking at I just lost it. There was one key metric that made all the difference in terms of our the labor dollar we were spending on. I can't remember what it's called in the book, but it was our inside sales, and it was anybody that was driving revenue, right? And how that related to contribution margin is what it's called. And so that was a huge understanding because we could see like, well, if we point these two, it was only 2 employees at the time that we were not overall, there was probably, 10 or 12 employees. But there was 2 employees that like one was calling, making dials all day, every day. The other's going on listing appointments, and he was a salaried agent. We salaried this guy. And it was a great decision. It worked really well in my scenario. I don't know that everyone should ever do that, but this worked really good for us. And the key metric was understanding like, okay, we can focus her on setting appointments in Temple, Oklahoma, which is a 2-hour drive. And he's got to drive out there 2 hours. Our sign guy's got to drive out there 2 hours. The house has about a 30 to 40% chance that it's going to sell. And it's about half the average in the marketplace. Or we could stop doing that and say, well, how many hours can we save? And we broke down to the penny, Like, I mean, it cost 50 cents to to create the file for a folder. And so every time we took a listing, we knew it was going to cost us it was $1,150 to take a listing. To take it all the way to closing was like $1,414 or something crazy like that. And so we knew every within the square footage of every human being, the water bill divided up by that space. Like, we knew what our cost was for everything. For the first time, it was fascinating. But it taught me to learn what to say no to, because when it was me, I was like, listen, I got to go meet with these people. They called me. They're expecting me to come out to their house and tell them what it's worth. And if I can't sell it, I need to be there. I owe it to them to be face to face to tell them that, and myself. And, and then I realized that, with my time, I was willing to do that. But with Stace's time, I was like, you can't do that. There's a business to be ran here, and it's not profitable if you're out there. And we went from negative 3% profit margin to 22% profit margin by understanding, reviewing those metrics on a quarterly basis, and then strategically getting everyone involved in the planning process, and then getting clear on the one or two metrics we're going to focus on that quarter, and then what are the priorities that we needed to execute. And that was the rhythm that we needed in order to go from, and then we did it in a year. So it took us a year to get to that level of profitability. But it was a heck of a task, but it was a tremendous amount of learning, and such a gap in my knowledge, saying from being just a young kid that got into real estate at 19 to learning how to run a business and put the right metrics in place and the right key people and the right, all those right metrics in place. But it was necessary. And I had to go through a very painful, life learning experience to get to the point where I was willing to learn it. Because I didn't want to do accounting. It wasn't what I enjoyed. But once I learned it, I became, a much better business person.
Well, and I think that that's important just to note that, for those, my hand raised right here, I got my degree in finance. So I'm trained in financial modeling and the business application around it. Accounting, accounting is a part of that. But at the same time, I don't love accounting. It's not something I enjoy. It's not something that I get intuitively. And so I have to really motor down. And this is something I was talking with my wife, as well as some of my staff today, is that just I have to motor down to think about payroll and to think about expenses. But the metrics, that's really, really interesting, because the metrics in your business are the lead indicators of what's going to happen. And most people focus on the results, which are your lag indicators. That's what's at the end of the year or the end of the daily activities. But your lead indicators, or your activity, in one of our past podcasts, it was called IPAs, income producing activities, or just, we need it to be at this weight, and you're treating it like a model. That's very important, and it's really impactful, I think, for you once you figured that out. I love that you mentioned Vern Harnish, Mastering the Rockefeller Habits. I'm gonna turn my screen for just a second. I literally have it on my bookshelf right there.
Yeah.
That's right there.
Nice.
So, and Scaling Up, I've heard is phenomenal too. Vern Harnish is a great author. Two other authors that I have personally taken their advice is you've got Dave Ramsey, who's one of my favorites. And Dave Ramsey talks about leadership is a real humbling thing, because if you've got problems in your organization, the good news and the bad news is look in the mirror. You're the one who caused the problem because you allowed this to happen. And at the same time, the good news is you can solve it. You can start today. You can own your business today and really step in and take charge of your business, which I think some of us are apprehensive to do. We're people pleasers, or we want everybody to feel good about it. And so that's the first piece of advice. The second is John C. Maxwell, and that's the law of the lid, right? The law of the lid talks about, you as the leader are the lid on your organization's productivity, efficiency, et cetera. And as you grow, your organization grows. So it's this personal growth model, which I'm sure has catapulted you into your career as a consultant. So I'd love to hear the flip side now. So you're on the other side, interacting with mega agents, big teams, big companies. What are some things that you see are pitfalls of people as they're maybe moving out of that 3 to 4 or 5 homes per month sold, and they're doing volumes, a dozen homes, 20 homes, et cetera, and they're doing that huge volume? What are some pitfalls that you see of that? But then also, what are some of the common traits that you see of these successful people in the exact systems? Maybe some real tactical stuff that we could share with our audience.
Yeah. So the number one thing I think that's the biggest pitfall is they're so loose with how they spend money because they're making a lot of it. So they don't they just don't say no to anything, and there's so many secondary impacts of some of the things that you do. And the taking time to slow down and really understand how am I processing all the things that I could be doing? What's the goal? What are all the ways to accomplish the goal? And then what's the best way to accomplish that goal? And so for most literally everyone that we've ever not everyone comes to us at about, but they usually come to us at about 30 to 60 or 70 transactions. And, the more they're doing, the more crazy it is, right? Like, they're burning the candle at both ends, and they're awesome. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're killing it, but they're killing themselves. Right. And that's generally where people come to us, is that they've got a little bit of a problem, and it's, they're trying to figure it out, but they don't know what the right steps in the right order. So a lot of it comes down to understanding the first key hires, and understanding org structure, and understanding your skill sets, and what skill sets are the skills, what things are going to need to come off your plate for you to do more production. The second biggest mistake, by the way, is hiring buyer agents too early. By far, I see more people make this mistake because they don't realize they just opened up a whole nother org chart, and now they're that they're putting their name in the boxes of, and managing and leading sales team and sales training and recruiting. These are all things that the onboarding, they generally don't have any of those things, but they're like, I'm going to get some buyer agents. I'm tired of showing buyers, or I'm too busy, when really they could probably get other, $10 an hour work off their plate more systematically for a little bit longer before they try to move to this model where they're getting the buyers and giving them for 50% of the revenue over to someone else to do the work. So like and again, these are all people that are, kind of aspiring to build teams. But that's generally, those are the two big ones that I see most of the time.
The other thing that I really see in the way that you describe just the way that your career has progressed is you've obviously had some big influences, and you mentioned Jay Abrahams, personal mentors. Who are some people who've impacted your life on this journey as you've gone several steps of, from real estate producer to now you're an influencer and as a podcast host and as an author? One of our past guests reminded me that the root of author is the word authority is in that. Mm-hmm. And so you've got this ability to be an influencer, and that's one of the reasons why you co-founded your company with Michael Reese. But, who are some folks that really influenced you? And you spoke about some of them, some of the authors and different people, but who are some people who really helped you along the way?
So yeah, definitely Jay Abraham is the guy. Just he refuses to give you the answer and just teaches you how to think, and that's a really big deal. And that's something that we focus on too. Is it's not about everybody wants the tactics, but what you really should be trying to understand is how are you coming to this decision, and what am I missing in my thinking? And Jay Abraham he just wore us down with that. And he's fascinating. Some people could never listen to him and can never make it through. But what he's doing is he's coming at you from so many angles, man. He's an incredible mentor, and he's so giving. And he's so expensive that you do whatever he tells you to do. So
what I got to ask you, how does someone like that do that? And obviously he's a master at it. How does someone do that without sounding condescending or somehow making you feel like he's doing Jedi mind tricks? How does that work where it feels genuine?
Yeah. I think, he taught us one of the principles, and I was living by it, but I never identified it. And it's the strategy of preeminence. And it's, fall in love with your customer. Everything at the foundation is, just to fall in love with your customer and realize that you're their protector, you're their benefactor, you're living for their benefit. And when you start living life that way in your business, instead of thinking about how great your business is and how great your product is, you really start to reap the rewards of that. And he lives that, right? So, he's generous with his time. He's definitely very particular about a few things, but he doesn't want to have his time wasted. He doesn't like this to be, entertain you. He wants to see you do work. And that's how we ended up working with him, was that he would give us like we were like, hey, we got a problem. This is what we're trying to do. And this is, this is what's going on. And he'd be like, well, you could do this, you could do that, you could do this, you could do that, you could do this, you could do that. And then he lets us go. And then the next week we're like, all right, well, we did this and this is what happened. And now we got this and now we need your help here. He loves that, right? Because he knows people are taking action. And so, and it's beneficial for anybody, right? If you're a mentor. But I think, once you understand Jay, what the reason that he's able to come from so many different angles is just because he's been and looked at so many different business models, and he's had so much experience that it doesn't make, some of that stuff may not be making sense in the time, but he's trying to open your mind up to, there's so many ways, there's other ways you could do it. Don't just, don't think it has to be this one way that's the one way and you're familiar with, because you're probably missing. And until you can make all those money connections and all these different angles, you can't really find the best way to move forward. And that's if you're just humble and are coachable, and which I think are critical to any mentor that you're going to go to, is don't try to listen for your points to be right. Try to listen for where you're wrong in your thinking and what you're missing. He was just by far one of our best. Outside of that, Darren Hardy has been a personal consultant that's been very beneficial to us. Frank Kern, internet marketer, extraordinaire, just an incredibly fun and brilliant marketer. Dan Kennedy, we spent a ton of time studying Dan Kennedy. He's got several books, obviously the No BS series. They're all really good. The time management one's probably the best book I've ever read on time management. And it's maybe the number one most colored up book that I had at the time. It came to me at the right time in my life. Others, there's been tons of others along the way. Clayton Mask, the CEO of Infusionsoft, we've spent quite a bit of time with him and masterminding with him. Nick Nanton from Celebrity Press, is a good friend of ours, has been a great influence on us over the years. There's been several others. I'm probably forgetting Vern Harnish. Obviously, we actually mentored with him for a period of time as well. But it's always interesting. Is we mentor with wherever our biggest gap is, or whatever problem we're trying to solve. We usually end up mentoring with whoever it is we can get, that we feel like can help us solve that problem. And then the other thing I would say, and we actually talked about this morning on the podcast, masterminding. And masterminds have been better than anything for us. And we've done a lot of them, and we do a big one. And the reason we get there's this huge benefit in mastermind is because, like, when you've got to present your biggest problem in front of your peers, people that you have a lot of respect for, especially if a lot of them if you're the dumbest guy in the room, which is always the goal, and everyone in the room is doing more than you, like, you spend a lot of time getting clear on what problem it is you're trying to solve, so you can articulate that to this group of people. That in and of itself is half of the value of a mastermind. And then the second half of that is being able to see around the corners of what's coming. And you see somebody that's a couple levels above you that has this problem going on in their business, and you start to figure out, well, maybe I don't have to crash into the wall every time. I can see a little bit around the corner. And you're not as emotional in the moment, right? Like, when you're presenting your case, when your top 4 people just left you, you're emotional. You aren't hearing things the same as when you're sitting back listening to everyone else in the room tell one person, no, man, you got to fire that person. They're toxic to your business. It's time to let them go. They're holding you back. Then you're like, I mean, you guys are kind of harsh, and so those masterminds have been served us really well. And it's just like getting in the room with people that aspire to be a better person, not just a better business person, a better human being. And then, they're willing and love you enough to hold you accountable as well. And that's a special group if you can find a group like that. And that's been probably the thing that carries us the furthest, and it sticks with you, right? It's not, it never goes away. You create relationships for life.
Well, that's phenomenal. And I've been blessed to be a part of a couple of mastermind groups. And I think that term is a little watered down in our business, but also in our culture right now. But the true essence of a mastermind is the way you're describing it, where it's like you're going vulnerable in front of people that you really respect. And a lot of people in concepts now, I could do that. I will tell you, when you are that person that, I've been 30 years younger than the average age of the group. And I'm like, don't want to say something stupid. And 2, I want to show that I belong here, and that's the last thing you want to do is, expose your flaws.
Right.
So just a quick tip on how you do that in such a way that it's productive and the result comes. And so is there an ideal size of group? Obviously, I've heard of the concept of a personal board of directors. Do you need to know these people? Is it better if you don't know them? Is there an ideal kind of like elixir here of that group together?
Yeah, man. I would say that what I feel like we may have done right in our mastermind, and we did a couple things. We were selective. It's by invitation only, and there's a minimum kind of production level, and I feel like you have to know them. And the reason, I at least need to, before, we would agree to let someone in. Both me and Michael would have both spend an hour on the phone with them about, talking through their business and where they're at. And, we look for people with ego because they're the worst ones to let into a mastermind. And, we're not perfect. It's happened before, but we've also had people come in with ego that learned, after one mastermind to let go of ego. And so, we kind of bring that element to it. But, I think you have to, you want a group of people that where there's trust in the room. And that's something that's developed by time spent together and, people willing to get vulnerable. And I think that getting vulnerable, we start the mastermind every time the same way about being vulnerable and, being open, and everyone coming with the mindset of like, what's one thing I can help them with their business. And, when you have a good enough percentage of the room that's there, like, we're not taking calls. No, you're not opening your computer and doing other things. No, you're not getting up and taking calls, and I think once you get past, and there's no magic number here, but I would say once you get somewhere above 60, it starts to get a little harder to police that. And there's a little bit more of that than you would like to see, but somewhere around 60, I would say 40 is ideal. And even smaller can be great. But it's, that's been what's worked for us. And, you gotta be willing to get naked, and that's, and have a similar language too, because if everybody's talking different numbers in terms of what their P&Ls are and they're not being real, so those are some of the things that I feel like really made the connection work for us. And people never want to leave because of those relationships, but they trust that if whatever they say in the room, they're only going to get honest feedback from people that care about them and care about their, what they're trying to accomplish, and that are willing, love them enough to tell them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear.
Yeah. Stephen Covey said, we move at the speed of trust. Right. And it is so important to be that person that's going to be humble and vulnerable, and the other concepts that I just keep hearing throughout. And you've given us some amazing resources. You've prescribed some amazing books. I love to say that all leaders are readers. They're learners. They are constantly willing to commit to learning in that journey. And so I think you could do that by having a great coach and consultant or mastermind group. But you can also do it by in a book, and you've written a book. It takes so much time and effort, and you distill down and get that concentrated knowledge that there's just we have so much easy access to successful literature. And with that idea, you've been all along the road to success. You've been there, done that. My favorite question is the one I hold for the end, which is this idea of dear younger me. You're writing yourself a letter, and or someone that you might know that's very important to you. Maybe it's a family member or someone that is starting in that same industry that you've had some success in. What's that advice you wish you knew when you were 22? And I'll add on to it. I was on a conference call earlier this week with two other agents, not in my market, from out of state, that we were just talking about a bunch of different concepts. One's a broker owner, one's a producer. And as you're thinking about those two people and you've consulted with them, what's the advice that you give to people in those models, especially in a boutique brokerage firm?
Yeah. So, if, to distill it down to one principle, it's like trying to say like, okay, if you could pass on one core value to your child, what would it be? And, you got like, 4 or 5, like they need these 5 for sure. But so like really like distilling it down to one's tough. And this one's related to mindset. And it's almost like everything I ever do kind of always starts here, but it's seek the best to be the best, right? Like just seek the best to be the best. And, if you, that's the, if you just, whatever it is you're in your life, you're trying to accomplish, doesn't matter what it is, you seek the best to be the best. And there is someone that probably wrote a book on it. And so, that's almost a guarantee. And, so that's probably where I would go as far as that goes. If I was to say, when I hear broker owner, because I feel so much pain sometimes when I hear that myself, I tend to start thinking a little bit differently about what maybe it is. And I think, from that perspective, someone that's got a larger business, maybe a more successful business, they probably, hopefully they are seeking the best and they are, putting themselves in the rooms. But I would say, being radically open-minded and open to being wrong about everything you think, and that with business models specifically. And for us, that's a big thing. I don't know if you've read it was the number one principle in the book, and he breaks it. Ray Dalio. Thank you. Ray
Dalio, principles.
Right. And being radically open-minded and transparent is actually like the first or second principle in the book, but it's being open-minded. Like so many times I see people not being open, like just being open-minded to like, maybe everything I thought I knew is not right. Because we get so used to what we know around us, and you just never know what might be a better way or something you might miss because you're listening through that filter. So just being open-minded, I think is probably the one thing I would pass on, that, outside of mindset, so that you're not missing something. It seems to be a theme for me today anyways.
Well, Jay, this has been a phenomenal experience. The time has flown by, as it always does for me. I just really appreciate your wisdom. I appreciate your ability, because I think it is an ability, and it's something that people learn is how to share some of the things that haven't gone so well. But kudos to you for all your success. I think it's really incredible. I know that you and Michael Reese are doing a phenomenal job in our industry. How do people find you? How do they learn more about NAEA and the things that you guys are doing to help improve and impact lives of others?
Sure. Yeah. It's not too terribly hard to find. You can just Google Jay Kinder and there's a number of things that'll come up. Hopefully most of those are good things. But NAEA.com is one way to reach me. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook. My phone number is listed everywhere. You can reach out to me. I'm a human being, and I respond to emails and text messages better than most people. So, anybody that wants to reach out, I'm happy to have a conversation.
I love it. Jay Kinder, thank you so much. I am so grateful for Carlos German to introduce us. He's awesome. It's cool also to have that shared accolade of the 30 under 30, yeah. The recognition there with the National Association of Realtors, Realtor Magazine. And I'm so appreciative. I know that our audience is really going to have learned a lot. And this is going to be an episode that I replay over and over myself, because I learn along with the audience. So for my guest, Jay Kinder, I'm the host, Kyle Malnati of the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. Love to say thank you to our podcast producer, Kayla Davis. And as I love to say, we will see you around the neighborhood. Bye, everybody.